So welcome. I spent a bit of time trying to figure out who gatekeepers are, where they exist, and how do we improve that relationship with gatekeepers. Um, and so that's what this is about. So throughout this, we're going to learn about gatekeepers. We're going to learn about where they exist, what role they have, and then talk a little bit, well, we'll talk a lot about how to improve experiences with gatekeepers. There's an entire exercise we're going to play. I was going to bring finger puppets, but I decided you're all adults, so you might not like finger puppets, so I didn't. So that's the welcome. Before I start and we start going on about into it, I just wanted to play a game to look at the prevalence of disability and chronic illness. Latest stats from Stat Canada say that it's 27%. And those figures really vary because some people with chronic illnesses do not see themselves as having a disability, and some people with hearing loss do not see themselves as having a disability. That would be the more common one. And a lot of people with learning disabilities or who are neurodiverse may not see that as a disability as well. So the numbers really get different. And so depression and anxiety may be part of that disability piece. You have to remember, if you can get short-term disability leave for something, then it could be a disability. So it's a really difficult word to nail down and say, this is a disability and that's not a disability. It's a very big umbrella term. So let's just, I saw this exercise from somebody else, and I'll give them credit at the end of it. I modified it a little bit. So the first question is, if you know somebody parenting, caring for, or living with a visible disability, that means that we can actually, they may use a sign, they may use a cane or a walker or a wheelchair, or they may have a service dog, or they may have physical differences that say, oh, they have a visible disability. Raise your hand. If you know someone caring for or living with a chronic condition such as cancer, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, arthritis, a motor neuron disease such as ALS, dementia, or anything else, raise your hand. So these are chronic conditions. And chronic conditions can go into relapse. MS and cancer are good examples. If you know someone parenting or caring for or living with a developmental disability, raise your hand. If you know someone parenting, caring for, or living with a mental illness and or neurodivergence, such as depression, anxiety, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and so forth, raise your hand. Usually when we get to about this point, most everybody's got their hand up. Disability is far more common than we like to think. So this exercise was based on Guy Harris. He runs Accessible PRS. So they look at accessibility in housing. And so now that we've done that part, I'm going to jump into the chat. Yeah, so a lot of us know these people. So the chat's really sent. So if you want to share your audio and video, you can. And if you prefer to use the chat feature, I'm cool with that too. So the first thing is, How do I pronounce your name? Where are you? And if you aren't near a city, what is the nearest city? And what do you do? And volunteering is considered a job. And what do you hope to learn in this workshop? And that one, I actually need you to write your learning goal down. So I'll start. My name is pronounced Wesdyne. I'm in Spring Lake, nearest city, Edmonton, and we're on Treaty 6, sorry. I run Positive Shift. I facilitate disability awareness training and offer life coaching to people who are adults. I used to do kids, but not anymore. It's now just adults who are living with disabilities and chronic illness. And in this workshop, I hope to learn how you perceive Gatekeeper's role in relation to disability and what you believe can be done to improve that relationship. So, your turn. Who would like to go first?
I don't mind going.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Sherry Lynn, and that's how you pronounce it.
Perfect.
I live in Creston, BC, which is in the Kootenays, kind of on the set, like very close to the border, near Nelson, if you know where that is. Yeah.
I do.
And what do I do? Geez, right now I'm kind of in transition and looking for work, but I just got obsessed with pottery. I actually just got over, I was diagnosed last year with breast cancer and finished all my treatments in at the end of August. So I'm just transitioning back into real life again. And with this workshop, you know what? I was looking through your credentials and everything about you as Wesdyne. Is that how you? Sorry, Wesdyne. Amazing art therapy and just such a beautiful resume you have.
Thank you.
It's always there's so much to learn and so much to understand about all of this, and I'm excited to learn as much as I can.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can go next. My name is Jessica. Sounds, I guess, pronounce it how it sounds. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm located in Treaty 6 territory in Amaspachi, Waskahigan, also known as Edmonton. And I am currently with the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights. And I'm very excited to be here because I have had the chance to interact with Wesdyne before, and I know they bring such a wealth of knowledge and perspective and empathy, like so much empathy for people always. So I'm very excited to be here. And I think really being more involved in the disability community this year, you know, I'm a proud granddaughter and mother and daughter to my mother, and my grandmother both have MS. So I'm a very proud daughter who have supported them in their journey. And I have beautiful niece, like I have one niece and nephew who have some disabilities that my sister's amazing with, navigating that journey and those challenges. She's a huge warrior and advocate for her kids. But yeah, I think I'm just here to maybe like learn, you know, when I am being a gatekeeper, and like, how can I make sure that I'm not making it harder for them? Like, they're already going through so much. Like, how can I be a better advocate and better ally for them and support them through some of the journeys and some of the challenges that they're going through? So yeah, and I love that you brought like volunteer work as work. Like it is, and so is like motherhood. I know my sister's a single mom. I have another friend, my other friend who has my other nieces. So yeah, I love that you said that. That was like my little intro. But yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
Good.
And I see Dar's in the chat, so I'll be quiet.
And Renee, welcome. Renee's in Edmonton and she works at the John Humphrey Center. She's sort of the big one there. And she wants to learn about those blind biases, which I think we all have. And the other is Adira. Thank you for spelling your name, Adira. She's located in Treaty 6, Edmonton. She's also with the John Humphrey Center. and she's just looking forward to hearing what's going to happen. So, what is going to happen? So, what are gatekeepers? So I kind of had to look this up because I wasn't entirely sure. But they are the people or policies. They're the go-betweens. They are the maitre d' who seats you at your table. They're the receptionist who points you in the right direction. They are often the first point of contact, and they control how you get from A to B. And that's easy to think about as people. As policies, they often are hidden. So we've heard some people talking about how transparency is needed. I want to escalate a situation, but I don't know who I talk to next. And so that's one of those areas where a policy controls whom we get to see and whom we get to talk to. I think we've all had that experience where we phoned a place, thought we were talking to the right person about what we wanted to talk about, only to finish or to send off the email or the form, have it sent back to us and say, no, I'm not the right one. So that's one of those areas where that policy, that hierarchy, if you will, that's a triangle. So here we are at the bottom. How do we get up towards those top people? And that's one of those areas. That would be a policy working as a gatekeeper. The other is they may refuse, control, or delay access to the services. And when I say refuse, that's really common. And I'm thinking specifically about the disability CPP benefits. So I have yet to meet someone who fills out the CPP disability benefits, gets the paperwork, has their doctor sign it off, so on and so forth, send it off to the government and have it denied. What happens at that point is a lot of people stop. They don't realize that often that is part of the process, because this is a policy that is acting as that go-between, but that the form needs to be filled out in government speak rather than plain language. So somebody with a disability who's already not feeling completely 100% that they even are allowed these benefits will sometimes give up at that point. And what they need to do is just refill them. So I will talk about who can help you fill those out. And then they may be somebody who oversees how work is being done and whether it meets certain standards. And that work can be either as a volunteer, as a parent. Parents quite often will feel criticized by other parents and whether or not they're meeting certain standards. So you could be a parent and have a disability and feel very guilty that your kids aren't in 2 sports and 17 activities after school because you have a difficult time doing those things. So you may feel that you're not meeting those standards. At your work, it could be, well, our standard is that everybody does an 8-hour day, and there are no exceptions to that. And that's one of those duty to accommodate things that gets a little trickier. Or it could be you're in university and you don't write per se. You do talk to text or something else, but because of doing talk to text and maybe having low vision or a learning disability, maybe there's a lot of grammatical errors within your work that doesn't affect the quality of what you're saying, but it doesn't meet those academic standards. Somebody who's dyslexic, I get that 100%. So this is a gatekeeper who's boy. This is a gatekeeper who identifies as female. And this is what it actually feels like to be a gatekeeper. And that's one of the things we need to remember when we're dealing with gatekeepers is they're answering to the public and they're answering to somebody higher up. They are in this really squishy place, and it's not a nice place for many of them because they're going to get, you know, a lot of negative impact from people when they can't get through. And then they're going to get negative comments coming down when they send something through to the wrong area. I hope that's clear. Are there any questions around that? No. Good. So again, so they may refuse, control, or delay access to a service. So I put in this, and this is actually a fish ladder. And for many people who have to go through gatekeeping services, this is what it feels like. We have to hop. There is a video, it's 2 minutes, it's 30 seconds long, so we're not going to put it in. It's just of a fish jumping up this huge fish ladder. And you got to remember the water's running down, and the fish has to jump all the way through here before finally they can get into where they need to go. And that gatekeeping process can feel as long and arduous as a fish ladder. And then we talked about how they oversee what's being done and whether it meets certain standards. So we've got somebody representing a supervisor and 2 or 3 employees or students or people applying for benefits. And the gatekeeper says, oh, it's really simple. You just go from here to there. And it's just this straight line. And then you step out and you realize it's this mess. It's this very non-transparent, convoluted system you need to deal with. So let's talk about where gatekeepers exist, because we do run into them. They're important. And they do serve a really good function. Like, ideally, a great gatekeeper is like a great maitre d'. They will balance out the amount of tables that are booked. They'll give wait staff enough time to serve their tables properly. Also, they'll book they'll make sure that all the diners aren't sitting down at once so the kitchen doesn't get slammed, so people actually can eat. And so there's this beautiful, like a gatekeeper, when they're doing their job well, they keep the customer satisfied and they keep business satisfied. And that's where they exist. They are between the business and the customer. So we see them quite often in healthcare. These would be triage, receptionists. These are the gatekeepers. And quite often, a lot of the early testing that we get when we're going through these things, those are done by gatekeepers. So they exist in healthcare. They exist in insurance all over the place. Short-term disability, long-term disability, trying to get healthcare insurance after you've been diagnosed. All those things happen with gatekeepers. Even as far as, I had a car accident and I have a temporary disability. Where do I go? So you want your insurance company should be able to work with you. Again, that customer and the business. Government. Government has more gatekeepers, I think, than any other thing in this entire world. And of course, the joke is a really good secretary is the one to make sure you never see anybody, except the people that are above you. In schools, we see gatekeepers in schools on all sorts of levels. It determines the amount of help that you get going through school. It can impact the grades that you are getting through your schooling experience. And it also can impact how long you stay in school or whether you leave school early. And leaving school early can mean dropping out in grade 11 in order to go to NAIT and take a trade. And that's okay. And that's important to realize that because of the way schools are set up as inaccessible, or the fact that there's so much stigma around needing assistance and the funding keeps getting smaller and smaller. You can have a grade 2 classroom with 3 aides in it. Take that same classroom, put it into grade 7, and we have no aides. Or maybe we have 2 kids that go into a pull-out school, program. Those learning disabilities didn't disappear. It's the funding has. So the other place that we see gatekeepers is in work. Quite often we call them human resources officers. In work, it could be everything from how the job description is written, to the type of work, and the conditions under which we work under, and whether or not the company has the imagination to imagine somebody who uses a wheelchair working in the warehouse. That's possible to do. You can be a picker in a wheelchair, and use a wheelchair. That's not a problem, but it's a mindset for people to get accustomed to. The other, of course, is travel. And travel is where we see a lot of people with disabilities getting very disappointed with the service that they're receiving. So now, does that seem to help you as to who our gatekeepers are and where we find them? So I'm going to stick you all in. I'm going to put you all in one group. Is that okay? Or we can use, I'm going to put you all in one group. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do in your group, and I'm going to I'll be your present during it. So we'll have everybody on screen. If you want to be on screen, or if you just want to use just your microphones, that's perfectly super too. So I want you to choose a scribe, and I want you to choose a presenter. So your scribes write down what your group's talking about. Your presenter presents it. Your scribes write down the answers to the questions. And then they share those answers with the presenter. So the presenter shares the findings with the big group. So you're going to tell us all. And then the non-presenters are responsible for presenting those times when you had a difficulty reaching consensus. And one of the reasons I put out all the rules, and I would suggest this, is because when you put people into groups, they just sort of sit there for a little while and they don't know what they're supposed to do. So we need a scribe, a presenter, and then a non-presenter who's going to tell us about the difficult times that you had in reaching consensus. So first exercise, because it's only fun if we get to do exercises. This is your avatar. This is who you are. You're going to be a white, cis, or straight male, upper middle class income. And so you've got money, secure housing, secure food. You have secure transportation. You also have the benefit of being part of looking like most of our politicians look like, from the same racial background as most of our politicians. And you're going to go and request a service from one of these things. Let's make it 2 of these things. I'm going to just change it up since we've only got one group. So let's say what you need from your school is what's called work integrated learning experience, or practicum. So that's what you want. And I'll let you figure out what sort of, so that's going to be the request that you're making is, I'm going to school, and now I need a work experience. Help put me into a work experience. So all I need is you to figure out your request. And so we said the request is a work integrated experience. So that's a practicum. You could be there for 3 months. You could be there for 2 months. And then I want you to just record the steps of doing that request. And then tell me, whose authority do you need to get to actually go and do this? And then how do you make sure that you're meeting all the terms and conditions that they're setting for you to be in that work experience? And then pretend that you went through the service and rate your satisfaction with the entire request process. So how would you like to do this? Would you like to do that you share your, if you go up to the top, right up here, it says sharing audio and video. And if you just make a request, I will put you in there.
I think we all might be, yeah.
This might be all of us.
Yeah.
That's okay. So, work integrated learning. So, Sherilyn's writing notes. So, Jess, you want to be a presenter?
Do I have to? I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay, all we need to know is, so we've decided what the request is that we want to go, what type of program is this student in that they want to make this request as a white cis male?
Ooh.
Should we just do like a, he wants to be a vet or something?
Sure, that sounds great.
Mhm.
So going to vet school, wants a work integrated practicum. Now, has to go through and make a request to do that. Who would he normally do that with?
Faculty?
Yeah, faculty. Anybody else?
Like the the HR?
Could be HR.
And then maybe
HR where though?
in the school.
That went with mine with school administration.
Yeah,
Okay.
like a student support or something, accommodations in the school.
Well, he doesn't need any accommodations. He's just going to go do a typical practica. If you're working as a vet, you have to complete X amount of hours before you graduate. So this would be built into the program. So you may have to see somebody who's maybe a supervisor of his program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then hope that they have a vet place. Or maybe he wants to do this practicum in a remote community.
So in that case, I guess potential employers
Yeah,
would allow him.
yeah. Beautiful.
And we
So
also,
then he has to get their approval. So now we've got them. And the vet clinic sets up terms and conditions. I see I wrote that twice. That's good. So they set up terms and conditions for that practicum. Might that look like?
Benefits, like you're not being paid, like kind of just outlining, just the working hours and I guess the standards or what you're expecting when you're at that practicum. And then also, I guess as a student, because I have done a practicum before, it was kind of outlining like when my availability is, how many minimum hours I would aim for a week or all together over a certain period. And kind of just like what I need from them as well to bring back to the institution to say, like, I've done the practicum and I've met the expectations of the employer. And they do say like my skills are good. So I guess like that you are like, yeah, your working conditions, what you will receive for your time and energy that you're basically giving them for free. And I guess how it will be like communicated that you've met the requirements and that you are a skilled person in this area that they would recommend to continue.
I love that, because now I've put you in a remote community. What might be some of the things what might be some of the critters you're seeing?
Some of the what?
Critters. What are your animals?
Oh, it could be anything. I mean, it could be it could be wildlife, honestly, because there could be like reserves or habitats that are like sanctuaries, much like I'm thinking like Elk Island, and I'm like, if that was up there. But it also could be just people, again, that don't have access to regular vets up there. Like I know, especially in remote, like cattle, horses, things that like livestock, especially.
Yeah. Okay. Now you go and do your thing, and and you're doing it. And let's say you got to be there 3 days a week. Of those 3 days, you're working with small animals and large animals. And then every 2 weeks, you have to go to an animal sanctuary and work with deers. Did you run into any problems doing this? Could you imagine any problems that you would have had? Because you've got food security, because you have enough money for food. Yes, and we have to connect with the supervisor. Yeah. And you've got your own transportation. So maybe housing might be a bit of a thing. So you might ask the vet to say, oh, and where am I staying while I'm doing this? Overall, how difficult was that process?
Not terrible, but I feel like there's a lot of like little unknowns, like especially around I've definitely heard things around I kind of know where you're going with this, but I'm already like thinking of things like, yeah, the food security issue, like it's so much more expensive to buy food up there than it is down here. Like the housing issues, even just getting am I getting transported out to this sanctuary by someone, or am I expected to drive myself around everywhere? And yeah, or fill up gas, like how does that work? Or yeah, there's like a lot of things in my head. Like I feel like it's a fairly simple process, but in my head I'm like, no, there's a lot of things. So
yeah, so it could be quite complex and it could be quite simple. I live in the country, so we have a lot of students who will do their pratica out here, and then they get to save the money that they were spending on housing in the city to come do a 3-month pratica and live with mom and dad. So it's a big savings for them. But yeah, there are little things within that. Okay, we jump to the next one. So we did our cis white male. We're going to carry on, except this time I want you to create a pretend human. And you can change any part of what that human is. So now I want you to choose an age, a race, a gender identity, socioeconomic status, and your mystery person has a disability, which affects the type of accommodation that you're going to be asking for. Why am I
So,
trying
Jessica, it seems like it's you and me.
to...
Do you want to?
Adele's there too.
I'm kind of in the background here too.
Do you guys want to be a just to make it completely diverse from our first one? An
I'll write it
elder woman who's Chinese and in a wheelchair? Or I'm just blurting out things if
Oh, I love
you
it.
want to try
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have an older woman who is of Chinese heritage and she uses a wheelchair, correct? I put her in your chat.
Perfect.
Okay. Remember, she's got to go through these gatekeepers. So that can be a people or a policy. It can refuse, deny, or delay access. And they may oversee how the work is being done and whether it meets that organization's standards. So again, we've got 3 of our gatekeepers here.
Mhm.
Now, going to do exactly the same exercise. I don't think we'll make her into a vet, but we could, because that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you want to run her through being a vet? Okay, let's make her a
Sure.
vet in a small
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
Okay, she's talking to the school. And what are some of the things that she's going to ask for in her accommodation?
She'll need wheelchair accessibility, and transportation. If there is transportation, it should be able to transport her in her wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
Are we assuming that she speaks fine English, or like?
I don't know. It's up to you guys. You tell me. Does she speak? Is English her first language? And is she comfortable communicating in English?
Let's say she has an accent, but she is comfortable. She's fluent, but she does have an accent. So maybe in communicating, it would be a little bit challenging for her to talk with the supervisors and the potential employers, because they might have a tough time always understanding her.
And also, I was thinking about like accessible housing. Wherever they are placed, will need accessible housing.
Mm-hmm. I'm scribing for you.
And I guess, God forbid, you have any dietary restrictions, because again, in remote communities, that's a very difficult thing, especially with like getting fresh fruits and veggies, unless you're growing it yourself or you can get from a local place. Much more difficult.
So I also think like I'm also thinking about like if there's, and this is not like I guess an accommodation, but something that might maybe be a barrier, if there's like connection to maybe community there, or even if there's like access to like, I don't know, like as an older person, if there's any like services that are needed that can perhaps be found in the city, thinking about if they can find that in smaller places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was actually a really good point, Idara, because I was just thinking about that a little bit. Like, you're going to a strange community, and again, you don't know where everything is. Like, oh yeah, they find you someplace that's accessible to live, but like, can you get to other places within your own community to even engage with them? Or are you basically going from the practicum home and you never go anywhere else? And that's not a meaningful experience either. So I guess it would be like, what supports are available in the community,
Mhm.
when I'm out there, so that I'm not feeling overwhelmed. And again, it might not be that they like the remote might not work out because of that, but then also I'm thinking too, like, how do they access the school supports? Like, how do they reach out to the school and say, this isn't working out, like either I need support or I need to be removed
Mhm.
and brought back. So I guess, yeah, like making sure there's a good check-in process and mental health and all this other supports available.
And not only that, but if you're applying for a practicum at a clinic, then you have to make sure that they're set up for you to be able to work and be able to learn and work in that environment if you have a wheelchair. And being able to access, if there's big cupboards and you're in a wheelchair, can you access things that you have to get?
Or
Yeah,
tables where people are like, you lift the dog on the table.
Yeah.
No. Sorry, Dar. I kind of came on at the same time as you. Did you have something to add?
No, I was just agreeing. Yeah, that's fine.
Also, the big animals would be a big problem because getting through farmyards aren't typically accessible. So now we're seeing how the disability is putting parameters. And I like to think about them as parameters or boundaries, because I have a lot easier time as somebody with a disability saying, these are my boundaries. And beyond those boundaries, I can't do that. So I have to stay in my boundaries. Because if I say, well, these are my limitations, how does those two words make you feel? Limitation versus boundary.
Boundary does seem a little more almost like empowering, like you're setting boundaries, but limitations, I mean, it's saying that you're limited. So it's kind of a negative on you, like a disability, I guess, because you're limited. Whereas boundaries doesn't seem as prohibiting. Is that the right word? To be able to do things, is you're just saying, this is what I can do, kind of, or this is how, setting the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like boundaries is more, I wonder if this would be the right word to use, was in like dignifying, because boundaries is something that like everybody has, and everybody has boundaries. So everyone can also like say that and enforce that and stick to that.
Right. I was thinking, Adira, as somebody who is a visible minority, I don't know how else to say that, but is a member of the BIPOC community, I'm sure that you have boundaries around how race is spoken about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Even things just for kind of like, obviously for my own like well-being too. So yeah, absolutely.
And when you think about them, I'm curious because I don't know. I'm very, very white. But how do you put those out there? Like, have you ever needed to defend yourself against a microaggression around those boundaries that you have? Because I would assume they're fairly strong.
I think like the most, I guess, like it is a daily kind of like reinforcement. But I think I can to share an example. I've been asked as like a Black woman, for example, by different people, why I haven't like physically gone to a particular protest, or why I went to one and didn't the other, or something like that. And I think just in terms of like enforcing that, two things, depending on kind of like my energy level, I would say I would either kind of like engage, just to kind of like let a person know that there's different ways to do like advocacy, and also just a reminder that like this is my lived experience. So me necessarily being physically at a protest or not is not really personally to me. I live it. Or I have boundaries where I just kind of like don't engage in those conversations or just don't respond to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to our boundaries, I do believe we will explain to somebody when they've come in so far to our lives.
Yeah.
But if you're way out here, I'm not explaining to you. And I know that sounds very strange, but within the disability community, this is a conversation sometimes I hear, and we do talk about, do you ever get tired of the question, what happened? Or why are you using that? Or why do you identify as disabled? And it's like, because I do. And after a while, you just get to the point where it's because I do. People who are a little bit closer, where I know I'm going to have a relationship, then maybe I'll share a little bit more. Because now this is part of relationship building. This isn't just curiosity. And that can be one of those areas where when we're talking with our gatekeepers, unfortunately, in many situations, we have to disclose a lot about ourselves, a lot more than maybe we want to. And so you asked Jessica where that sticky point is. That's one of those sticky points. Idira does not ever need to explain anything about herself other than, hi, I'm Idira. You know, I have no right to know your history. That is something that would evolve relationally. All of our differences and commonalities, they all evolve in relationship, which is so difficult when we are dealing with a gatekeeper, because we have no relationship with the maitre d'. And we're not going to form a relationship with our maitre d'. And yet, this is where that first point of contact is. And this is the person who tells us whether or not we can get from A to B. So that becomes a big thing. So yeah. So we've talked about wheelchair accessibility, transportation, comfortable speaking English, but has an accent. Communicating with supervisors could be more complex. And then, Jessica, you pointed out that there was really important that there be this really strong communication with the gatekeepers at the school and the gatekeepers at the site, so that we can build in safety as she's going into this experience. There could be dietary restrictions that are more difficult to accommodate. We want connections to the community and accesses to services that maybe serve the older population. Good check-in process with the school, making sure the clinic is accessible and the tables are at the right height. You know, and also where I can even go. So yeah. Share screen. So it's quite a different experience to go through it with a disability. How much more difficult did it seem to be as soon as we changed our avatar from being a white cis male who's fairly young and fit and able-bodied with their own transportation and all the rest, and then we did this other, and then we jumped over to the lady. How many more steps did we have to add?
I felt like it just feels like, I don't know, I just felt like so many hurdles that it almost felt impossible. Like my dream was gone. Like it would just be impossible. And I know we're not really bringing that up as well, but you were talking about, like, if say this is someone of color, or, you know, has been in the country for a long time but has an accent, like they're also going to be navigating with just like their mental health of potential having, like, you know, inadvertent racism thrown at them, or, you know, our own folks should be taking care of us. What are you doing here? Like, there's just like that crappy, shitty racism that's going to come up, and excuse my language, but there's that crappy stuff that happens. That's like, you know, how are they going to have that support? So I don't know, just hearing all this, I was feeling so defeated. I was like, oh my gosh, this is just so much harder. And it's not streamlined. And yeah, and you're really lovely in saying boundaries, because it's such a nice word, but I just kept thinking like limitations, like, and I'm like, it feels like limitations on myself.
It does.
I feel like
and that. And those limitations aren't yours.
No.
Those limitations are being imposed upon you. So when we talk about the social model of disability, that's where those limitations that are imposed upon. In an ideal world, this woman would have no problems becoming a small animal veterinarian. And she would be able to live in her community. And she would be able to work. And she would be able to afford the food that she needs to meet her dietary needs. She would be able to connect with her community in a meaningful way to support her mental health, her spiritual health, her physical health, all dimensions of her life would be supported, and her intellectual health. That's the goal. And also being able to get there quickly. We saw how fast it was for him. Man, I'm just showing up and I'm doing my thing. And with her, because the environment puts so many of these blocks in front of her, it's not that simple or sweet. Let's say she was going to travel. She's going to travel from, where should we put her? Where does she live? Give me a city she needs to travel from.
Let's go Toronto, just for the heck of it.
Okay, she's going from Toronto. She's going on vacation. Where are we sending her?
Let's go to Australia. I don't know. Let's go to Australia.
Australia. Beautiful. So, London.
London.
So obviously she's going to fly, because you can't take a train through the ocean. So she's going to fly. Now, what's one of the greatest fears that we hear from people with disabilities when it comes to flying and using a wheelchair? Anybody go for it?
I've
Breaking my chair. Absolutely. Absolutely, Melissa. Melissa's in the chat and she's saying, they could break my chair, and she's absolutely right. And losing my chair. It's a darned long flight from London, all the way to Australia. She may need to use the washroom. This could be problematic on a flight. Also, when you show up at the gate, they may not, the wheelchair that you're transferred into, sometimes they've got them and sometimes they don't. The other is she may travel with a companion. So now she's got to pay a companion fee. Unless Nope, she can't because she's flying internationally. Within Canada, if you have a disability, you can actually have your companion fly for free. So there are a set of forms that you fill out, and your companion flies with you. So it's kind of a cool trick, but it is domestic flights, but Air Canada and WestJet both offer that service. That nobody advertises it because they won't make any money. But yeah, so losing my chair. I mean, if they can't keep my luggage straight, and if they break my chair and I show up in Australia, what happens to my 10-day holiday? Yeah. So you can see where it gets really, and being in a different country and now having to try and find wheelchair repair people and repair services, I wouldn't even know where to start. Where would you start? Where would you even start? Yes, the transfer seats, and many flight attendants aren't trained to assist. Yeah, absolutely. I think I would go online and I would find out whoever the disability rights people is, and say, hi, they broke my chair. Who does wheelchair repairs in Adelaide? And hopefully there is somebody there. So all of a sudden, you see, these are the complexities, and the person isn't complex. Using a wheelchair is not complex. What is complex are the systems that we go through and those gatekeepers. And then once the chair is broken, then there's this whole process of not just getting it fixed so that you can use it right away, but then who do you make that complaint to? And how long does that take to get fixed? So it becomes quite, yeah, a whole rigmarole.
I have a tiny comment, like just what this is
Yeah.
bringing up, because I was thinking about it just in terms of like me planning a holiday and the amount of stress like you're already under, because you're just like, okay, make sure the hotels are booked. I've got a passport. I have currency. I have this. I have transport. But then on top of that, you're having this worry of like, yeah, they break or they lose my chair. What happens then? Or like how long that might happen. And like, say you're someone like me who like, I'm a planner. And I actually think of this. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to find in Adelaide. I'm going to find out what disability groups in the area. I'm going to join a Facebook group in case something happens. I'm going to have some phone numbers to call in case I'm in crisis. But like all that added work and stress is taken away from the fact that it's supposed to be a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
So like just something as simple as going on a vacation causes you such undue stress that potentially you might just go, F it. I may as well just stay home, because why even try to do this with all the fear?
Yeah.
So I keep thinking about like how much fear and worry you're in all the time of just something going wrong and sidelining the whole thing, and what impact that might have on, say you're going with your family or your partner or just friends. And it's like, what impact am I having on them? So maybe I should just stay home.
Yeah. And I think that's a real reality. Also, you get there and you realize, oh, I can't take my wheelchair down because I will screw it up if I use it near the sand. And I don't know where I get a loaner wheelchair that I can use in the sand. I will tell you something very cool. So right now, I attended a conference this summer, and Parks Canada is in conversation with Parks System in the US. In the US, every park, national or state, has to have an accessibility coding. So all their trails are coded as to what sort of equipment you can use on them. And then on top of that, that was part of the ADA that was signed a long time ago, over 30 years ago. They are light years ahead of us. On top of that, every state is responsible to have a few sites within that state where people with disabilities can pick up loaner equipment, recreation equipment. And amongst that loaner equipment is they have kayaks for people who are paralyzed from waist down. They have a little boat that you can borrow, and these are all for free. So you can borrow them for 30 days at no cost through these state programs. They have a boat that you can actually ride up to in your wheelchair and fly cast from. They have chairs for adults and for children that have the balloon wheels that are meant to go on the grass and stuff. They have all these things that you can do, and then on top, and as well as all of the bicycles that you could, if they have more bicycles than I can imagine, in all different sorts of ways to accommodate as many types of disabilities as possible. In a lot of the national parks and in many of the state parks, the walkways are made much wider because a recumbent bike takes up a really wide amount of space on a sidewalk. And so if you're using your recumbent bike, but you can't use it in a lot of trails elsewhere because you would be off of the trail. So they've really gone a long ways. And this group in Canada is working with the Accessible Canada Act to come up with some of these standards for the trails across Canada. And in BC, Sherilyn, they actually did a citizen research project where citizens went and walked the trails or took their walkers or whatever, their adaptive equipment out to the trails and rated the trails for accessibility. Unfortunately, there's only 2 trails that are accessible. But they also looked at campgrounds to see whether or not there was campgrounds that would be accessible. And I think so when we talk about this, Jess, those are I agree, they're hopeful. Because now we start seeing this and we start going, okay, those things that we were so worried about, maybe we can let go of some of those. So what did you notice? So as you were doing this, what emotions were coming up for you? You mentioned feeling defeated, Jess?
I felt frustrated. I felt defeated. And I think I said, like, I felt like, especially with someone trying to be like a vet or something like that, I felt like my dreams are dead. There's just no way this is ever going to be able to be realized. This is impossible. So yeah, just utter frustration and just a lot of sadness, I'm sure, too, I would be feeling. And, and just feeling like I'm losing out on so many beautiful experiences and opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I think also something that maybe comes to mind is the feelings of just being a bit of I don't want to use the word burden, but like sometimes when even like personally with my experience, when I go into like certain spaces and I know that maybe there might be discussions of like a race and stuff, I tend to like not even really want to engage because I don't want to. Would not want a situation where people are like, oh, like, of course she's going to say something. I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense here. So it seems, it almost makes me feel like just a burden. And also just having to think about like, sorry, I'm trying to phrase my words properly. Even the thought of having to almost kind of like explain yourself to, or explain your needs or boundaries, I think is also just like it seems insurmountable. I would feel. Yeah.
Also sounds, when you're talking about that, Adira, It sounds like it's invasive,
Yeah,
very
say so.
invasive of your dignity. Insurmountable. Sherilyn, any ideas?
I was just thinking about, as like a very privileged person in like white woman in Canada, how hard, like how stuck I get on doing things like taxes or whatever. And if I come across any little burden, I'm like yeah, it totally just crushes me. Where if I had limitations or disabilities and coming across all the burdens that can build up, how hard that would feel. Yeah. Yeah, I can't really fathom what it would be like.
Yeah, it's a lot of rocks to put in your backpack.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep referring to these sticking points in my mind as microaggressions. Do you have any other terms that might better describe these experiences?
So, if I could, at the center, there's a kind of like training or facilitation or discussion that we have about like microaggressions. And I've had to like do some like reading about it. And I know like in one of when we're talking about microaggressions, one of my colleague actually, and even like another book I've read they have kind of put or have said that like they're not so micro, so maybe they should not be called like microaggressions, because microaggressions kind of like might reduce like the impact, for example. So just like aggressions almost, because the impact that they have is strong and it's not micro. So
Yeah, it is, because just when you say insurmountable, that's not microaggression. That's something much bigger. And so that is living in a world and operating within systems made for cis white males. And so I remember reading Ed Roberts when he went back to high school. He was he had spent 3 years not in school. Ed Roberts is one of the founders of the independent living movement in the States. So in the 60s, in the 50s, he got polio. He got it at the very end, 2 weeks before the polio vaccine was released in the States. And as a result, he became a wheelchair user as well as using a respirator. And his mother said, "You have to go back to school. It's time, Ed. I've taught you. You're out of the rehab. This is your life. You need to live your life because you're worth a life. Your life is worth it. Go live it." And he was terrified going back into school. He was one of the older students now. And he said, "Everybody's going to stare at me." She said, "Well, yeah, of course they are. They've never seen anybody using a wheelchair. And they certainly have never seen anybody using a respirator, a portable respirator." So figure out how you're going to do this, Ed, because you need to do this. You have so much to offer. You need to do this. And so he decided that he was going to do it as a superstar. He said, every time I walked and I rolled into an area, people would stare at me. And I decided they were the paparazzi. They just couldn't get enough of me. He said, so I would smile. He said, and I took all those stares and all those looks, and I realized this would be so much like how it feels to be at that point in time, it was, Frank Sinatra, because he's a lot older than us. But that's how it would feel to go out, and nobody knows you, but everybody wants a piece of you and everybody wants to stare and ask you questions. He said, so, I just got very selective as to what I answered. And again, and that's and that's a really hard skill to learn, is being selective about who you answer to and how much you tell. I had somebody ask me a couple of weeks ago, the disability question, what is my disability and why do I have it? And I said, because I do, and I'm uncomfortable answering that question with you. I said, I don't ask you your sexual history, so you're not allowed to know my medical history. This is private. So, yeah. Yeah, and so many people, you're right, Jess, so many people are made to feel that way. And they get a lot of couch experts telling them what they should do to cure themselves. And those are really unfriendly. So, is there anything else that we need to discuss before we talk about how do we improve the accommodation process? Whoops, come on, move.
I mean, Wesdyne, I guess I have a question. So being selective in what you answer, etc., is that something that you found that you get more comfortable with, like, over time? Or is that like...
You get more comfortable with it over time. The other is that my background is within mental health. And so that's something I coach people on. And it is something, I'm talking with another woman and we're talking about developing a school program, specifically around how to set boundaries for children. And that thing about don't hide it, flaunt it. And that comes from a woman whose name I'm not going to remember right now. But the program is called Don't Hide It, Flaunt It. And she is limb different, and she's raising 2 sons who are limb different. And she is no longer hiding it, she's flaunting it because it's part of her identity. And I love that. Okay, so here are my suggestions. Good Lord, I came up with a bunch of them. One of the first ones would be go to your experts. You got a whole bunch of experts. And every province, every country has experts, and they belong to disability agencies. So Voices of Albertans with Disabilities in Edmonton, the Cineva Foundation in Calgary. There are a lot of different advocacy groups. Get them to go through and examine your processes and remove the cruddy ones and figure out how to make them transparent. Have people with disabilities be part of the group that actually develops those processes. And then hire people with disabilities as consultants. Hire us. We're really great. And it's not just the forms. I remember listening to a gentleman talking a few weeks ago about having forms that you couldn't read with a screen reader and you couldn't fill out using voice control. Totally inaccessible. There are website standards. Use the WACG. Number 2, it is important. Is your telephone system accessible? are your referral processes be accessible? So there's about the forms, government forms. I have yet to find one that is accessible. In fact, our government is so far behind, and it's not. BC's a heck of a lot better because their advocates there they have a lot more power. Match your job descriptions with your actual job duties. Make services affordable. Also ask, is it really necessary to have a doctor or a psychologist report to do this? And start from the point of compassion. If I could state one thing, start from compassion. And then have people with disabilities be part of the team. I can't stress that enough. And be really transparent about the processes and the reasons the application was rejected. We're not getting that feedback. We just get a form sent back and say, no, you don't qualify, or you make too much money. But they don't tell us any, to disqualify for a program because of $200 is ridiculous. And yet a lot of people do. And it can be very, or you didn't get the job interview because you couldn't wear your sweatpants to come to the job interview. Some people don't know that. Be really, really transparent about the process. Or maybe you didn't get the job because you came in and your language was it was way up here, and our company actually uses this language. So really being honest about what can happen. And then be willing as an agency to refer anybody to a disability rights agency that can help them with the process. So I think if you're a gatekeeper, one of the things it is your responsibility. Let's take some of the onus off of people with disabilities, and let's start owning some of those responsibilities. So we as gatekeepers need to be able to say, I know this process is very difficult. Why don't you phone this agency or this agency about getting those help with those forms? Or, maybe they can be of big help to you. They've got people there who will help you fill up those forms. They have people who will help you find the equipment that you need, help you make those travel arrangements. People who've actually done the traveling and know the best practices. As a gatekeeper, be prepared. You should have that list as to who you can refer to. And refer people. If you don't know, it's okay not to know. Got a lot of gatekeepers who are very uncomfortable with that. And it's okay not to know. Not everybody knows all the things, and I don't. So that would be, what are you doing? Go. It doesn't want to go to my end. Oh, there we go. So look back on your original question about what you hope to learn. So did you achieve your learning goals? Yeah, people with disabilities are the main source. Absolutely, Jess. And did you learn your goals?
I feel like I did. And even just, I love that you just made us kind of put ourselves in someone else's, circumstances and just go, what might feel like a simple process for you. But when you compare the two, like you really see the differences, like you really see the flow. And even just with the first one, you were saying the time, like I did an internship and a practicum, and it was like maybe a month and we kind of knew. And like they kind of were like, yeah, we know, we're just finalizing some details, and by the end of like the semester I knew exactly where I was going. I
Mhm.
could see this something like this taking 6 months to a year just to find the right fit for an individual living with a disability. And I'm like, and again, you might get there and 2 weeks in, you're like, this is horrible. And I've heard some horrible stories and I can only imagine. But no, just like overall, I really love that I got to put myself in someone else's just potential circumstance. So I really am happy with that. And I think my goal was to kind of realize when I might be as well, like when I might be actually the one holding back. And I think that is just really doing due diligence as well to try to find out like what barriers will be happening, and also asking too, like not just assuming. I think that's another one too. That's something I'm really taking out of this is don't assume I know better ever. I need to ask and say, and like you said, I need you to identify those boundaries and I need you to identify what your needs are so that I can best help you.
Mhm.
So, and then, yeah, trying my very best to remove as many of those as possible. And then when it's not possible, saying, what can we do to make it smaller? Maybe it's not such a big, giant hurdle. And, but
Mhm.
we've got a contingency plan. We've got 3 contingency
Mhm.
plans so that no matter what, that person's like, okay, I feel supported.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm taking out of this. It's just, there's a lot, but that's my big ones. And I ramble, so I apologize.
No, and that's really important. And then what you said about feeling supported, I think that's huge because it can feel difficult not to feel supported. And if there's one thing I'm hearing a lot from people with disabilities in different areas and people who are from the BIPOC community as well, is feeling isolated in different situations. You know, I didn't feel isolated when I was with all the people that looked like me. And as soon as I went into general population, I felt really isolated. And so I think that's a really big one. So based on what you learned, otherwise this was just a fun experience, name one actionable thing that you will do this week or within the next 2 weeks. One actionable thing that you can do. Doesn't have to be a big, huge thing, but what's one actionable thing that you can do?
Um, Me thinking about this, like I was just about to say, like, for myself going forward, maybe not this week, but I think like short term and a long term goal. I think short term goal is actually like, I think I need to do a better job for myself of just maybe doing some research in my own community and saying like, what are those places that if a friend brings this up or one of my loved ones brings this up and says, you know, I'm trying to do this for my kid, or I'm trying to access equipment and I don't even know where to start. Maybe just researching for myself, like places like Voices of Albertans with Disabilities, or places that the disability community can reach out, and educating myself a bit more of some of the places that folks can reach out to and say like, well, I've heard really good things about, or maybe joining some Facebook like groups or something if there's an open opportunity for that. If there's a group or something that says, come learn like what resources we offer, like maybe just again, educating myself so that if someone brings this up, I can go, I know where you might be able to start.
Mhm.
Kind of helping them with that journey of saying like, I don't know exactly, but like, and instead of saying like, oh, well, you just need to do this, or you just need to research yourself, maybe saying like, I've done a little bit and can I make a suggestion? Like I might know some places. So I'm
And also
hoping.
refer them to a friend you know who has a disability.
Yeah, and saying, yeah, like my sister, for instance, like she's in Penticton and her son is neurodivergent and has cerebral palsy. And so, you know, saying to her, like, what have you done? Because she used to live in Edmonton, and being like, you know, if someone else is having this issue, like, where did you go? Where did you find your most support? Who actually helped you?
Mhm.
And showed care rather than just like pass you off. So, yeah, I think just educating myself and asking the people I surround myself with that maybe are dealing with disabilities or invisible or visible, and saying like, what helped you, or like, where did you go that was actually helpful, so that I just know too. Or, and again, I think I was just going to say long term, I think too, just giving space if someone's just really frustrated and saying like, if ever you just need to talk, um I'm here, and like I might not have solutions, but I can shut up for 10 minutes and maybe just let you talk about how frustrating a process was, because like you were saying, sometimes just feeling heard does wonders, to know someone's by your side saying, I get it. And I can't put myself directly in your shoes, but I can understand how you feel, and I can give you that space to talk.
Yeah. And Charlene said the same thing. I think just holding space and not limiting anyone just because they might have a visible or an invisible disability. We forget 70% of all disabilities are invisible. So that's a huge number. That's it. Thank you very, very much. If you want to learn more, I've got blogs as well, and I do have links to resources. One thing I do for myself is I read. And I don't read big, ugly stories. I'm reading a series of fairy tales right now, and they are so much fun because the woman has taken these fairy tales and said, what would happen if we just flipped the script and crypt the fairy tale? And that's what she's doing. And they're fun, fun, fun.